Life Stories.
Well, welcome you, Simon, to come and share your story on Life Stories tonight. Thanks, Simon. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Good evening. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be with you guys, and real humbling experience, really, after what you've told me, that the outreach and where the amount of countries and the amount of people that your ministry leads. So and tonight I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my life, how it was, and what changed me most importantly, and really how I'm living my life now to a certain extent. And I was born in a place called Burton-on-Trent, which is in the Midlands of England, of the UK. And to this day, I don't know who my biological father is. My mother married a man when I was 4 years old, and he was my stepdad. But there was no love there. There was no love there from him towards me, and not really any love from my mother at that time either. I don't think much of that, really. It was just kind of the way it was. And I make no excuse for anything that happened in my life, but that was just the way things were, you know. And I was quite a good rugby player at the time. I played rugby to a real quite high level as a young man. I was on the verge of an England selection, and my stepfather never came to see me once. I didn't think much of that at the time, but when I had my own two sons, I couldn't wait to see them play sport. You know, that was the way it is. And you know, as I go around the country, I speak to a lot of men. My ministry is mainly to men, and sadly, it's not an unusual occurrence. I remember I was speaking at a place called Colchester, and there was a big fella there, and he said to me, Simon, he said, my dad never had a good word to say about me. He was always putting me down. He was in the military. And when he died, he said there was a group of people that gathered around his grave, all ex-military friends. And when they saw me, they said, you're Trevor, you're his son. And he said, yeah. He said, well, your dad, they said, well, your dad couldn't stop talking about you. You see, he could say it to his friends, but he couldn't say it to his own son. And sadly, that's not an unusual thing. That as I go around the country, I see that. And in the father-son relationship is really broken. And it's something that in some of the work I do, it's what we're fighting hard to restore. In 1976, I'm back a few years now, I came to London to join the Metropolitan Police. Why did I come to London to join the Met Police? Well, I've been watching a programme on the TV at the time. It was called The Sweeney, and it was for those who are not from the UK, it was a police programme. And I wanted to be like these guys, running around with guns and all sorts of stuff. But I realised very quickly that I was walking the beat at a place called Holloway in North London. But because of this lack of love from parents, my heart was very hard. My heart was like granite. And I wouldn't do anything for anyone unless there was something in it for me. That was the way it was, and that was the way I lived my life. I had a great time in the police force. I did all sorts of things. You know, I did obviously walk the beat, did a lot of plain clothes work. I worked on the big buses. They called it a territorial support group, which is the nearest thing in the UK that we've got to a riot squad. And I worked on that for a number of years. But I was about the furthest away in the police force from being a Christian as I ever was in my life. And why? I'll tell you that because I'm ashamed to tell you, I used to swear on the Bible many times in court. But it meant nothing to me. It might have been being a copy of the local newspaper or whatever. It meant absolutely nothing to me at that time. One main theme ran through my police career, and that was football. Did an awful lot of football duty. At the time, I was a Metropolitan Police boxing champion. I played rugby for the police, and in those days, I fought and drank for the police. It was a macho sort of environment, and they used me. I don't know if you know the term battering around me. We used to have a bit of metal where we'd smash into doors, and I was the one who smashed the doors down because I was a bit larger than everyone else, I guess. And I was the last one, first one in, last one out, on every occasion, even in the public, in the pub when we were drinking. So that was my life. Very, very selfish life I led, but football was a main theme for me. And back in those days, I had a great big moustache, and the football fans called me the Walrus. And I worked over at a football club called the Arsenal for 10 years. And in those days, the Arsenal had a big bank of terrace where people stood, and they called it the North Bank, and that held about 20,000 people in there. And in those days, in the 70s and 80s, whenever Arsenal played a London club, there was always a big fight in there because no one had colours in those days, and everyone had the same accents, and they all got into the same place for the one intention of having a fight. And I had many battles in that North Bank with clubs like Chelsea, West Ham, Millwall. I don't like to say that word Tottenham, it sort of chokes me a little bit, but them as well. And I've got to tell you, I thought the blue uniform that I was wearing, I thought it made me invincible. I thought I was like Iron Man. I thought I was like Superman. I thought nothing could hurt at all. One game changed that, and that was a game between Arsenal and West Ham United. And at the time, West Ham had the most fearsome, organised set of soccer hooligans that there was, and they called themselves the ICF, that stood for Intercity Firm, because they travelled to games on intercity trains, not special trains, so they could avoid detection. And on this particular day, it's May the 2nd, 1982, it was 3 weeks before I was due to get married. And on this particular day, they came in to the North Bank from the top, the bottom, the side. It was like a military operation. And they let off a great big red smoke bomb right in the middle. Now, I was the first police officer in the middle of that smoke bomb. And what happened was that I see all this happening, and I rushed in, and I thought my colleagues my friends were going to be behind me. Well, they were a little bit later than me. They didn't quite catch up with me. And the two sets of supporters, when they saw me in the middle of all that smoke, instead of fighting each other, they picked on me, and I was very fortunate to get out of there without any serious injury. The game was stopped, the fighting spilled out all over the pitch, and sadly a young Arsenal fan got stabbed to death outside the ground, all for a game of football, which is just simply crazy. Well, back in the pub that night with all my friends, all my police friends who I've been working with that day, I loved the kudos. I loved the reputation that I had, and I was sucking it all in. And they were saying, "Did you see Pinchy? Did you see the Walrus get involved?" And but that night, as I closed the door to my room, and I was by myself, I suddenly felt very, very vulnerable. It's the first time I'd ever felt vulnerable in the police force, and I thought I could have been seriously, seriously injured on that particular time. Well, 3 weeks later, I did get married. I married a lovely lady called Linda. Did I love her? Well, the answer is no, because this heart was as hard as granite, as I said before, and I was very selfish. So she'd say, "I love you." I'd say, "Me too." That was about as far as we got. We had two boys, Tom and Jamie. Did I love them? Well, to be honest with you. I'd care for them, I'd protect them. They were my sons, but I didn't know love them. I didn't know how to love. I got no capacity to love. I got no idea what love was. My police career continued. I did, doing all sorts of different things. In fact, I spent a number of years working alongside the Central London Football Intelligence Unit, which monitored the capital, all the hooligans who came through our capital city. Again, I had many battles there. We had informants, people that would tell us information about what was going to happen. So we had informants in every hooligan group there was up and down the country, except for one, which was a club called Millwall. But again, we was involved in many battles inside and outside the grounds in those particular days, which was like the early 90s. During the police force, I joined the Freemasons. I was, and I got quite high up. I was a master of a lodge, and so I was heavily involved in that sort of stuff. And what I'd say right now is that since becoming a Christian, I've prayed through all of that stuff. And if anybody's asked you to be member of a Freemasonry lodge or anything like that, steer well clear of it. And there's some great stuff from a ministry called LL Ministries, which explains all about Masonry. Now, I had these two lovely boys, and they were great. But at that time, my family came very low down my list of priorities, sadly. My work was number one, really. All the stuff I was doing around the football was number one. Training was rugby. I was playing all that sort of stuff. Socializing, and my family came sadly right down the bottom of that list. And I don't know if you know that, but obviously you probably do, that you can. It doesn't. You don't have to be a great father to make a child, and that was me really. I wasn't a great father. In fact, I was never at home because everything else was more important in my life, because everything else was about me and not my family, and that's the way I was living my life. And my life's about choices, really, and I think most people's lives are. And I made one particular choice, and I thought it was a good choice. And I joined a younger set of men, all plain clothes, in North London, and we did a lot of plain clothes work together. So we were working together, and then I started socialising with these young men after work. And I used to go out to pubs and clubs, and all of a sudden, I think they call it a male menopause or a midlife crisis, and I was going straight for it. I've got this great big tattoo on my arm here. I've got an earring in my ear. Starting to experiment with steroids to build my body up. I was into all that sort of stuff, and I thought I was having a great time, but my life was slipping away. Going out to pubs and clubs, not coming home at night. My wife didn't know what was going on. She was confused as to what was happening, and it was very easy in the police force to make excuses that I was working late because we'd had an arrest or we had an observation, all that sort of stuff. And I could disguise what I was doing behind the police and allegedly working. And I won't insult anyone's intelligence and in suggesting I was now engaging in one-night stands. I was having affairs with other women. It sort of really spiraled out of control. And I ended up, I'm ashamed to tell you, I ended up leaving my wife. I left her at a time when her mother was terminally ill with cancer. Her mother was dying with cancer. This is how selfish I was at the time. Her mother was dying of cancer. I left her to look after her mum, to bring up the two boys by herself, and hold down a full-time job. And as I drove off my drive, she was coming onto the drive, and she looked at me and she said, she didn't say anything, but the look was, what have I done? wrong, and she'd done nothing wrong because it was all about me. It was all, I was at the centre. I was so selfish.
Life Stories.
I didn't want the responsibility of a family. I just wanted to have my time, and I thought I deserved it, quite frankly. But things got worse for me at that time. Things got really bad for me because in a nightclub in North London, I ended up hitting an off-duty police officer, smashed his teeth out, and I found myself on a serious assault charge. They suspended me from the police, which means they took away my badge. I couldn't work for the police, and I started going through the court process. And now I was seeing things from the other side. I'd been putting people away for years, and now I was the one who they were looking to put away. And it was a real sobering experience. And some 15, 16 months later, I ended up in a Crown Court in a place called Woolwich in South London, in front of a judge and jury with all the wigs and all that. And I was facing a charge of serious assault. And if I got found guilty on that charge, I would have gone to prison. And prison for someone who was a police officer wasn't going to be a great place. I had a 5-day trial, and at 4 o'clock on the Friday afternoon, the jury came back and gave me a not guilty verdict. How I got that not guilty verdict was to do with that football match I told you about. They call it post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD, which means unawares I've been suffering from this for many years, and all this came out in the court, and the jury acquitted me. I still blame the police because I couldn't see my part in it. I thought I'd done this for the police, I'd done that for the police, I've been all over the place, and they couldn't back me up, so I wasn't too happy. But me and the police parted company there and then. After 23 years in the police, they gave me the option to leave, and I took it. And looking back on my life right then, right there, if you're a Christian looking at this, or someone who can relate to what I'm saying a little bit, I had what they call a God-shaped hole. Looking back, I can see that. And I, at that time, tried to fill it with all sorts of things. I haven't had time tonight to tell you about all the drink and some of the drugs and all the women, all that sort of stuff. I tried to fill this hole with, and the training and the boxing and whatever. Nothing had filled that hole. But now I was looking at something that I thought, yeah, this is going to fill this hole here. And that was money and material things. Now, how did I come to get involved in that? Well, I had plenty of time on my hands when I was suspended. I had plenty of time on my hands after I left the police. And I was training 2 or 3 times a day, in fact, up at a place called the David Lloyd Club. It was like a health club close to where I lived in Chigwell in Essex. And uh, there was a group of guys there, and always had pretty women around them, always had nice cars, and always had plenty of money. And I wasn't silly. I knew that these guys didn't earn this money by any reputable means. They were into criminality. But I looked at that and I thought, I want a bit of that life. I want a bit of that easy life. I want a bit of that money that they've got. I think that's going to fill this hole here. And so I started training with these fellas, and they were very keen, really, to get me on board with them for what I knew from my police days. And also, I don't know if anyone out there has worked in a team at all. But when you work in a team like I'd done for 20 odd years, you had a camaraderie. And when I was out of that, I missed that camaraderie. Now I was getting another sort of camaraderie with these guys that were doing a bit of criminality. We was having a bit of lunch afterwards, having a bit of food and having a laugh and a joke. We'd go out together. And I put myself up for doing a few bits and pieces. Now, they started me off with a few low-level debt collecting assignments, which weren't governed by the Office of Fair Trading. We'd knock on the door and we'd get a few quick back for people. And pretty soon they'd learned that they could trust me in that. And once they knew they could trust me in that, we stepped it up and we'd smash into places and take large lumps of cash, mainly from drug dealers and people that weren't going to complain too much. And I've got to be honest with you, I had a bit of fun with all that money. I could earn probably 3 times as much in one night than I could earn anything near that amount of money, even more than that these days. I was getting a lot of cash, a lot of money, and I had nice cars, I had nice holidays, I had nice clothes for eating in some of the nicest restaurants. But what I learned about money was this: is that if you put money as your number one aim in life, you're always going to come up short, because this hole wasn't getting filled at all. I wanted more and more stuff, and 5 things I learned about money. I mean, it's okay to have money. It really is. It's not a problem to have money, but if you put it as your number one aim in life, you're always going to come up short. 5 things, I don't know if I can remember them tonight, but the more you get, the more you want. The more you get, the more you spend. The more you get, the more you lose. The more you get, the more you worry. And the more you get, the more you leave. You don't see a funeral car with a 7-bedroom mansion attached to the back. No. And there's a line in the Bible that many people misquote. They say, money is the root of all evil, and they miss out one word, and that's love. And the love of money is the root of all evil. It's the love of money that was driving me. I'll give you an example. I went out and bought myself a 4.7 litre Cherokee Jeep. This thing was black, big thing, all black, blacked out windows. The registration mark was WAR War. I thought, yeah, that's a bit of me. I thought I was Billy Big Bananas driving this car around Essex. A couple of months later, they brought out a new model. They got rid of this car. They brought out a new model. It was a new Jeep. And I thought, wow, I want that. I don't want this. This was like dirt on my driveway. So I went out and I bought the new model. I was driving that thing around and suddenly saw a Range Rover Sport. I thought, I want one of them. That's how it gets you. If you put money and material things as your number one aim. And I believe as a Christian, if you put anything above God, it's idolatry, and you're always going to come up short. You see, I wasn't gangster number one. I'm not trying to say that I was, but it was a difference between me earning a living by upholding the law. I was now getting some money by breaking the law. That was a difference, really, the big difference in me. And in the police force, we would go right up to that line. There's a line that you don't cross, and we would go right up to that line and never really cross over it. But because we've got moral standards, moral codes, but this new set of guys I was with, there was no morals, there was no codes, there was no ceiling. Everything was game on, if you like. Let me give you an example. One of the fellas, he owned a pub in a place called Bethnal Green, which is in East London. And a man walked into his pub, disrespected him, and he jumped behind the bar, this guy, and took out a knife, knocked him to the floor, and slashed this man's face, and had to be pulled off before he had done any more damage. That was the sort of people that I was with. That was the sort of people that I was associating with at the time. Now, I wanted more and more of this stuff because nothing was giving me peace. You know, I'd have peace for a little time, but then it would go again. I wanted more money. I thought more money was going to be it. I thought more material stuff was going to give me that peace. So I was pestering these guys to be coming out and doing more and more work, if you like, with them. And they saw that, and to be honest with you, I was a bit naive at the time, but the green-eyed monster of the money blinded my eyes to the fact that these guys were never ever going to trust an ex-policeman, 100%. And they come up with a scheme where stuff was going to be coming in from Spain, and it looked like, for me, they sold it to completely. Work was going to be a dirty word. Money was going to be rolling in all the time. I was going to have the villas and all that. I wanted it in Florida, but you know, there's no honour amongst thieves, especially where money was concerned, because I put a large amount of money into this scheme, and that was the last I saw. I went out to Spain to try and get the money back. A place called Port Banús near Marbella, but realised it had gone. And I tried hard with these fellas. I ended up one night driving a dodgy sort of a stolen BMW car over the Bolo flyover in East London. The boot had a load of cocaine in the back. That's how low I'd gotten, how desperate I got. But it came to a point where I said to these fellas, you've ripped me off, and I don't want nothing more to do with you. Now, one-on-one, I could handle these fellas, but not in a group. You know, they come after me, they come after my family, and anything I held dear. So I just had to throw the phone away and say, no, nothing more to do with you, and walk away from that situation. Now, that left me very angry, and I was a very prideful person, and a lot of that stemmed from the police force, and obviously having a lot of money that built that pride up even more. So this hurt badly, and I was very angry, and all reason went out of my head, you know, because I don't know if I'm speaking to you, if you ever had anything on your mind 24 hours a day, you couldn't get off it. You go to bed at night, it's on your mind, you can't sleep, you wake up, it's there. And this is how it was for me. This revenge was eating me away. And revenge and anger, if you don't get rid of it, turns into resentment, and that's how it was with me. Nelson Mandela, the great South African, said that resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies, and that was exactly how I was at the time. I'd go into the gym, I'd punch the punch bag till my knuckles were raw, but nothing was working. I was a very angry man at that time. And then God threw me a lifeline. I was in the very, very lowest pit I could have been. One more step, and I was either going to end up in doing a very heavy prison sentence or in a shallow grave in a forest close to where I lived. And I know that's the truth because I was speaking at a conference a few years ago in Cambridge, and an Irish guy I'd never ever met before came up to me and he said to me, Simon, he said, God's just told me that he's protecting you, and he's still protecting you. He said, and at one time in your life, 2 men left their homes to take your life, and God protected you, and he's still protecting you to this day. So I can see what I was involved in, where that was happening. Now, God threw me a lifeline in the only possible way that I would have taken it and responded. And this is where all the other rubbish in my life starts to turn around, and the new life starts to begin. I was in that gym one Saturday afternoon. I just had a workout on the Pinchbeck, and I was storming out of the gym. And I looked over, and there was a guy on a running machine. That's the same guy. Remember, I told you about the guy in the pub that attacked the man with a knife? It was him. A very nasty piece of work, very violent man in that part of Essex. But he had turned his life around through his faith in Jesus Christ. Through his faith in Jesus Christ, he turned his life around. The peace that was in him on that day, the peace that was shining out of him on that day, was like no other thing I'd ever seen before. And I was wrecked, don't forget. And as a sidebar to that, the man who he attacked was a good friend of mine, Jeff. He's walking around with a scar all the way down here. He's also a born-again Christian, and there's been reconciliation between the two. Now, that can only happen through God, really. I went over to this guy. I'd taken the mickey out of him before behind his back, not to his face, about him being a Christian. But on this particular day, I looked at him and I said, look, I'm wrecked. I need to know something of this faith that's turned your life around. And we started going out for a bit of breakfast. And I remember one day I said to him, you know, I used to be a copper. And he said, yeah. He said, yeah, of course. We all know you were a copper. I said, well, back in...
Life Stories.